Hi, I'm Trip4s, and I've spent the last 12 years building Commander decks. I've played Commander consistently for 12 years without taking a single break, and in that time I've built hundreds upon hundreds of decks. One thing that a lot of people get wrong when deck building is actually the wraths you put into your decks. So, this tier list, I'm going to try to rank every single wrath in Magic the Gathering, starting off with white. Now, I'm going to be judging them on three things. First, impact. This is what actually happens when it hits the board. The more creatures a wrath removes, the higher its impact will be. Then we have niches. These are the situations where you're actually going to want to play those wraths. You see, in certain decks where your commander means literally everything, you're not going to be able to play certain wraths without also destroying your own game plan. Finally, cohesiveness. Cohesiveness is what brings the deck together. If a wrath not only removes your opponent's board, but also helps your deck win, that's what's going to make a wrath really high on our cohesiveness scale. So, I am prepared to start off with Retaliate. Retaliate's interesting. Destroying all creatures that dealt damage to you this turn. It's an instant speed wrath. This is meant to be played mostly in single player, and it has like 100 billion things wrong with it. One, often you're not actually getting attacked by somebody with all of their creatures. When that happens, Retaliate's going to be pretty okay, but realistically, you're taking one or two creatures, and this card's going to feel less of a wrath and more of a multi-target removal spell. Two, you actually have to be dealt damage. So, like, unless their card has double strike, you're actually not preventing any damage going through. You're just tanking it. Overall, I think this card is awful as far as cohesiveness. It really doesn't fall on any niches. I mean, it doesn't kill your creatures, which is nice, but I think its lack of affecting anyone except for one player exactly is probably going to put it into F tier for me. I think there's probably decks that maybe force a fight with your face that Retaliate could do something with, but I really think that deck is going to be few and far between. Fall of the First Civilization. This is a saga. Its first two things are not going to matter too much, but its third one is what we're looking at. Each player chooses 3 non-land permanents they control, and they pop everything else. So, this could be useful in a deck that has many really big things. I can imagine something like a white-green ramp list that wants to keep up a green virtue, maybe a Caged Sun in a mono-white list. I could see Fall of the First Civilization being good because you get to kind of select all your best permanents, but I think in the majority of cases, you're really wanting to use a Wrath as a removal spell plus, right? Like, you kill their Narset, and also the rest of the board dies, and Fall just doesn't do that at all. I think I'm going to put it into a C tier just because its first two effects are like alright, and the third effect, while not being a really great wrath, is functional. What must be done is interesting. It's a modal spell, so we can either pop all creatures and all artifacts, or we can reanimate a historic thing. So this can get back really impactful artifacts and creatures if you're like a legendary deck maybe. Destroying all artifacts is useful against a lot of decks. You see stuff like affinity lists that actually don't really care if their creatures die because they have so many ways of getting it back. I think it auto-snapped into B tier, and honestly, I'm kind of there, right? Like, on one hand, the reanimation's probably not going to come up much because you don't really like spending 5 mana on a reanimate. But I imagine the universe where, like, you get an Elish Norn in the graveyard, and then you bring it back with what must be done, and this card just feels broken. And then after the game, somebody picks it up and is like, oh, this is also a Wrath? Like, that's crazy. So I'm going to place it into solid B. I don't think it's anything crazy, but I think it's definitely up there. Valiant Endeavor rolls 2d6 and then choose 1. Destroy each creature with power greater than or equal to the result. Then make 2/2 white knights equal to the other result. Holy RNG. So, first off, let's talk about the nightmare scenario. If you roll like a 5 and a 6, 2 6s, This card might just do plumb nothing against the majority of boards. If you're trying to remove, your optimal situation with this, most of the time, it's going to be roll a 1 and a 6, kill all creatures, then make 6/2/2 knights. I imagine there's some times when like you actually don't want that, right? You're playing something like the doll that cares about all your creatures having power 2, and you go, ooh, what if I, roll a 3 and like a 2, and then we blow up everything that's big, and then make a bunch of 2/2 knights that go with our, synergy. I can imagine this has its own little niche that it's going to fit into really well. Knight Typal might want this card, but I think one thing we have to note, and it's going to be important going forward, is this card costs 6 mana. Meaning when you cast Valiant Endeavor, most of the time you're actually not doing anything else. You are casting Valiant Endeavor, and that's your whole turn. And I think for a Wrath that's going to take up my whole turn, I need it to be way less RNG based and way less affecting my own board. I think this card isn't nearly F, because I can imagine, a Knight Typal deck. There's some decks this could fit into, but I think it falls solidly into the D tier. Realm Cloak Giant is weird. We have a 5 mana Wrath that destroys all non-giants, and then on the other side it's a 7 mana 7/7 with Vigilance. So I think this card has to be kind of split into two ways. First, we have to think of it as you're playing a white deck with a big curve. How do you feel about a Wrath that later on, if you need to, you can cast a 7 mana 7/7? Not good. Like, almost not good at all. The Wrath costing 5 mana means you're probably not doing much alongside it. It being a 7/7 with Vigilance, no actual way of getting through. It's usually just going to be like a dumb idiot that you're attacking with. One thing I need to note is that, evasion is super important in Commander. Because when somebody's way ahead and you want to be attacking them, they usually have enough power to keep up some blockers. So when you have something like a big Vigilance attacker, it's usually only swinging into the guys that are already down and out. So it feels real bad to not have anything on this creature. But then we have to look at it the second way. And this is where that cohesiveness comes in. It says non-giant. There is going to be a Jeskai Giants deck out there that plays Realm Cloak Giant. And you're going to play against it. And you're going to get cast offed. And they're going to destroy your entire board and then swing for lethal. And you're going to have that happen to you once, and you're going to go, oh, that's so cool. I didn't even realize Realm Cloak Giant said that. And then it's going to happen a second time, and then it's going to happen a third time. And on the fourth time, you're going to be like, this card sucks, and I hate it. This is the stupidest card they've ever printed. Why does it not destroy your creature? It's just a one-sided Wrath. This is stupid. And because of that, I think it bumps it up. I think as is, it was probably falling into like, the F, the D tier. But because it destroys all non-giant, it finds itself a really interesting niche. And I think it's solidly C. I'm even going to put it above the Saga. I'm not 100% sure it goes into B, because, it only really goes in one deck. But man, does it go in that one deck hard. Sunblast Angel, this is a card I've played many times. So this is the first one that has gone into a personal deck of mine. It's a simple 4/5 with flying, pops all tapped creatures. Now, I'm going to show some other cards later that do very similar things, but I want to comment on one thing specifically. This is a creature. We love creature Wraths because 1, they can get reanimated super easily. 2, they can get, fetched out of the deck. They might have some big synergies in decks like Giada, once Angels in the deck. It doesn't really care what they say. Well, this one's a Wrath. So if you have 4 spots that you've decided, these spots are Wrath spots, Sunblast Angel basically gets to take up a Wrath spot without having to take away from your main game plan. So we love creature Wraths, except for Realm Cloak Giant. The bigger thing is this doesn't have to happen at sorcery speed. Yes, it, usually will, but in decks that flicker, and this is the main way I've used Sunblast Angel, in decks that flicker, you can sit on a Sunblast Angel on the battlefield and say, if you attack me, I'm going to ephemerate my Sunblast Angel and pop all of your creatures, because they're all going to be tapped when you attack me. And that's where Sunblast Angel comes in. It's those spots where you get to go, you're sitting on a Brago board and you're like, well, hey, I hate to tell you this, but you can attack me this turn, and then I'm going to swing with Brago, flicker Sunblast Angel, and just clear your whole board. Because of that, it's not the most competitive Wrath in the world, but I think it goes into S. Because there's so many situations where I'm looking at, a Sunblast Angel, and I go, if this was a Wrath of God, this card would just suck. But because it's a Sunblast Angel, it's like the most impactful card on the entire board. Scourglass. Tap it and sack it, pop all permanents except for artifacts and lands. Only during your upkeep. So, most Wraths just happen. You go like, well, here's a Wrath of God, pop all creatures. Scourglass, you don't. You go, hey, I'm going to play Scourglass, and we're going to wait a whole turn for it to happen. People who've played Nevin Earl's Disc know this effect where, on one hand, it can make you feel really powerful having like a switch that you can pull at any time. But on the other hand, if you just get naturalized, then nothing mattered. Scourglass is like the worst of both worlds because, one, you have to wait a full turn cycle for this to actually work unless you're playing something that can flash out artifacts. And I want to be clear, I can think off the top of my head 3 different commanders that natively give artifacts flash. Just off the top of my head, I can think of 3. So you could play Scourglass in those decks and have it be pretty decent. But as far as as far as your average deck shouldn't even look in the direction of a Scourglass. Do we put Scourglass higher because of those decks? Where, maybe Scourglass in your end step and then untap upkeep Scourglass is like pretty decent in those artifact-based decks? Like Gandalf the White, Maybe. I think it definitely keeps it out of F. Does it put it into C? I don't believe so. I think Scourglass is probably, even in those decks that, can flash out artifacts, I think you're looking at Scourglass as like it's all right. You don't usually want to wait to Wrath is its problem. You kind of want to Wrath, immediately. Play of the game is super incredibly weird. Another player can help you cast it, and it exiles all non-land permanents. When we're talking about impact, this card is high impact. It's going to shut out everything. The problem is the assist mechanic is super weird and wonky. On one hand, if you only have 4 mana up and you can't do anything else, and you go hey, can somebody help me cast Play of the Game? Maybe somebody will help you so that you can Wrath the whole board and this is an insane Wrath. It's a 4 mana card with one of the most impacts out of everything. The problem is when you have 8 mana up. Because when you have 8 mana up and you go, hey, can somebody help me cast this Play of the Game? And you have another opponent who kept up a bunch of mana for counter magic and, flash speed things, and they go, well, why don't you just pay the other 4 mana yourself? You kind of have to look at them and go, well, I want to cast this Wrath and I want to play my commander. And those situations are really hard to maneuver around. So I think if you can make a lot of alliances and, build a lot of rapport with your table, Play of the Game can be really strong. If you can't, it's just bad. Another problem is if you are just super behind, Wraths are amazing. Wraths are the best thing in the game if you are super behind and everyone else is out ahead. Play of the Game does nothing there because your opponents are going to go, absolutely not paying for that. My board's too good. Or I wish I could help, but this is my main combo piece. And if I let it get exiled, I don't have any recursion for it. So I just can't help you. And you're just going to end up dying because now everyone knows you have a Wrath because you kind of had to reveal it to the table in order to ask for help. Overall, this is going to the top of D because I feel like you could cast it in some situations, but man, do I need to think 4 times before putting it in a real deck. Sunfall Invocation, a brand new one, but a heater. Gift a card, you have to give an opponent a draw, who cares, to pop all creatures, and then reanimate a creature card put into your graveyard this way. This can be your commander without having to worry about, an opponent countering it or something. So this is just a card to freely go, pop all creatures, I get one back. Is this the best Wrath in the universe? No. Does this have impact? Oh, it has impact. Not destroying all non-land permanents means it doesn't have like the most impact out of this whole list, but popping all creatures is the main thing you want to hit with your Wraths, obviously. And getting one card back means you are getting your best card, and your opponents now have to sit on that. 5 mana is not too much. It's not 4. It's not 6. That's the big 2 mana values, right? 4, you can cast a Wrath and develop a little bit of your board. 6, your whole turn is your Wrath, basically. Starfall Invocation, there's a universe where you get to play you get to play a Mind Stone and then tap that Mind Stone to pay for Starfall Invocation early. There's a situation late where, you have a lot of mana and you can go Starfall Invocation plus recast your commander, which is a lot easier to do on 5 than it is on 6. I think it hits like a really nice balanced B tier. And honestly, I think it hits a nice balance at the top of B tier. I could imagine putting it in A tier. I could never imagine putting it higher. But you know what? For now, just to get a little bit of a, idea of where all the tiers are, we're going to throw it in A tier. Next up is Fated Retribution. Woof. 7 mana. Pop all creatures. Pop all planeswalkers. I'm not even going to read the last line. That last line is literally nothing. You're never casting this. The point of this spell is that it is a 7-drop. But it's an instant speed Wrath. So you can pass to your opponent, let them kind of dig their own grave, put more like dumb cards onto the battlefield, and then you Fade Retribution in response. Maybe you go like, hey, if you attack me, I'm going to flash in a Wrath and clear your board. There's a universe where you just play it at sorcery speed and go like, I have enough mana and I want to rebuild after. The hope is that you put this into a super controlling draw go deck. And the problem is that super controlling draw go decks have so many better cards to be playing at instant speed. I think this is solidly at the bottom of D. I can imagine putting it in F. When I said 6 mana was so much you had to spend basically your whole turn doing it, 7 mana is just more. So I really can't imagine putting Fated Retribution into even the most hard control of all of my hard Drago control lists. Speaking of 6 mana, exile all creatures. Final Judgment. We do have an insane art of Okagachi here. I want to make that clear that this is a very, this card would be a lower tier entirely if that amazing art wasn't there. But man, is this mid. You're spending 2 more mana to exile instead of remove for a card like Wrath of God or Day of Judgment. And is that worth it against some decks? Against zombies, against Dredge, this is going to feel real strong. But I can hear a lot of you saying that there's just a better card that also starts with F, that's also at 6 mana, that's also at sorcery speed, that also exiles all creatures, that makes Final Judgment really hard to play. If you're playing like a Kamigawa block constructed list, I can imagine a Final Judgment going pretty hard. But actually the other Wrath was also printed in Kamigawa, so this is going to land solidly in D tier, but I want to make it clear that it's near the middle of D tier. I don't think it's that bad. Like, if I see a Final Judgment played against me, I'm going to go like, oh, okay, word. Well, you're playing a Final Judgment. I'm not going to make a big deal out of it. But I just can't imagine, like, willfully putting it in a deck that I own. Urza Silex, I love the whole lore of Brothers War. This card is, obviously a big part of it. First off, you have to pay 3 mana for this card. Then you have to pay 4 and tap it. So you're paying 7 mana if you're doing this all in one turn. Tap it and exile it. Each player chooses 6 lands they control. Pop all other permanents at sorcery speed. If it's put into exile from the battlefield, which it will be when you activate its ability, you can pay 2 to tutor your deck for a planeswalker and put it into your hand. This is weird. It's weird on a lot of grounds. First grounds where it's weird in is that second phrase makes you think, oh, planeswalkers. Decks where, I might be playing a big Teferi, and I think, ooh, this is I'm going to clear the board and then set up a big Teferi, do some dumb stuff. Not to mention the fact that you're paying 9 mana for that effect, essentially. But if you've ever played a Super Friends deck, you understand that the best Wraths don't destroy permanents. You don't want permanent removal, you want creature removal, because creature removal is going to stop everyone else, but it's going to leave you with a huge board state of planeswalkers to rebuild incredibly faster than everyone else. Urza Sylex is actively bad for planeswalker decks. Maybe there's a situation where this is good for, like, decks that run a planeswalker. Like, you're not a planeswalker deck, but you're a token list that runs, like, both Elspeth, maybe. Sure. I could imagine this card being better than average in those lists. But mostly, we're going to be caring about the fact that 7 mana pops all permanents except for 6 lands per player. White doesn't land ramp, so we're not that scared of that effect. It resets everyone. It could reset a green player real bad. It is destroy, so you set up like a heroic intervention, maybe a Boros charm to give all your permanents indestructible, and then you get a one-sided huge wrath. The problem is that that streak goes both ways. If your opponent has a heroic intervention, you just spent 7 mana to catapult one of your opponents into first place. So I think if you build around her as a Sylex, I could imagine putting it in a deck. Maybe if you're a deck that has a lot of artifact tutors, I should note this card costs 3 mana. So there's Tribute Mage, right? Or Trophy Mage, one of those two, that can tutor up Urza's Sylex on the creature, the self. I'm going to say it's solidly C tier ahead of Realm Cloak Giant. I think the fact that it's an artifact makes it more tutorable, and I think that I can definitely imagine putting it in a deck of mine and not feeling bad about it. Wave of Reckoning. Each creature pops itself equal to its power. Next, okay, so this is weird. This is a red effect. And the thing about the red effect is that you really want it to be Blasphemous Act, right? Like, 1, you're paying 5, which is not an insubstantial amount of mana. But the point is, you play either 1, a lot of walls that, are not going to care about this effect, or 2, you're playing a lot of creatures that say when damage would be dealt to this, instead do this like big effect. So then Wave of Reckoning is actually really beneficial to you. The problem is, I think those decks are pretty actively bad almost all the time. I think this effect is bad for those decks because most of those cards are like 1/1s and 2/2s. And 2, wall decks, like, I'm not saying it's not good in walls. I'm just saying that wall decks have so many better wraths than this. Like, genuinely, just, there are so many better cards. So I think it just gets outclassed by other cards that do its niche, but better, which is going to land this pretty solidly in D tier. Like, I could imagine throwing a Wave of Reckoning into, like, a budget walls list, but I think if I'm doing full power walls, this card doesn't touch my 99. Fortunate Few. Choose a non-land permanent you don't control. Each other player chooses a non-land permanent they don't control. Pop all other non-land permanents. There are a lot of cards that say basically this text, but this card does it in the worst way. This card does it in the worst way because you don't actually get to choose anything you control. So since you're not making the choices, often a table can, like, just screw you out of a game. Remember, you want to wrath when you're behind and the rest of the table is ahead. So you can go, Fortunate Few, choose your Arcane Signet, pass. And then the next player can go, okay, I'll give you your commander if you give me my commander. And then you can give him his commander. And then, we'll all have, like, our best card on the battlefield out except for Trips. And, like, you don't want to be in that situation. So I think Fortunate Few is going to land, I would say, at the top of A, because you can twist it a little bit. You could go like, hey, I'm gonna cast this Wrath. I'll give you your commander if you give me my Cage Sun. And, there's definitely ways to pull this where the card's really strong, or there are even ways where if your whole table is like, losing to one player, somebody's on like affinity, they have a huge board, you can kind of go, hey, let's all just vote to, choose something small so that we can just kill the board. And, maybe this is a card that can just shut one player out of the game entirely. But I feel like its niches are pretty niche, and there are better cards that just do this effect, but better. Divine Reckoning, speaking of cards that do sort of the same thing, each player chooses a creature they control, pop the rest at 4 mana. We're finally getting to our, I believe, if I'm not incorrect, not counting Retaliate, which I don't, our first 4 mana Wrath. And then it has Flashback 7. So I like building stupid decks. I have not built a mono white graveyard list yet. I believe that one day I probably will, because there are only so many decks you can build when you build decks daily. But Divine Reckoning, being able to pay 7 mana to Flashback is just really funny. I'm imagining the kind of deck a mono white graveyard deck would be, and it's the kind that plays Late for Dinner. It's the card that plays Revivify, what's it called? Revive, the 4 mana white Reanimate. And those decks are going to play big white idiots like me. And when you have those, you're going to want to keep it around. So a Divine Reckoning, not only is a Wrath, but in this, weird deck I'm imagining, Divine Reckoning is actually going to keep your creature around. Now, this card can also fit into other lists. Like, there's a Narset list out there that runs Divine Reckoning, probably. There's, some other... I really don't like Voltron lists, so I'm actually blanking on, like, good Light Pause... good Voltron lists. I guess Light Pause, right? There are some decks out there that probably play Divine Reckoning, but I think all that said, it's probably at the height of B. Maybe an A tier. It has some niches where it's like the best card in the deck, but I think there's another card that's going to come out later that's just going to kind of shit on this card. Chroma's Vengeance. Pop all artifacts, all creatures, pop all enchantments. Cycling 3. So cycling is the best deck. It's going in S tier, no questions asked. This card fits in a few niches. One, it's a card with cycling. Cycling decks tend to like cards with cycling in them, and just giving a Wrath cycling is like pretty strong. Two, it has the niche of like, if you're a Drago control deck and you're winning the board, sometimes you just want to cycle into Chroma's Vengeance to get a card in. Finally, this pops creatures, artifacts, and enchantments. That leaves a lot of room. Decks that are playing a bunch of battles, maybe. Decks that are playing a bunch of planeswalkers. Decks that are playing any card type that isn't mentioned on this card is going to get a full non-land permanent wipe, but keep around their cards. Is this the best non-land permanent wipe for planeswalker decks? No. Is it a really good wipe for planeswalker decks? Yeah. That's telling me it's in either the bottom of B tier or the top of C tier. And honestly, I think a Chroma's Vengeance is OG enough and fits into just so many decks. It's so generic that I'll throw it in the bottom of B tier and not feel bad about it. Citywide Burst. Pop all creatures with toughness 4 greater. So there's another card that's this, but like the opposite, that I think is crazy. Like, destroy all creatures with power 4 greater. This would be like one of the best Wraths in all of Walls. But toughness 4 greater. You have to be playing a very specific deck. Now, does this deck exist? Absolutely. Like I was saying earlier, the doll that cares about all your creatures having power 2. Your toughness is not going to be that big. So Citywide Burst is going to be a real cheap Wrath. Also, when I say this is a real cheap Wrath, this is a 3-drop. You can play a 3-drop and then like also play out the rest of your turn. Especially you got like the amulet for white that makes all white spells cost 1 less. This card's a 2-drop, then you get to play more cards that are cheap. Or like, this card could do some damage. Problem is that you're going to play this card, in your Alesha deck that is going to reanimate a bunch of cards that, are real small, you're going to realize about halfway through the game that you've stacked up all your cards, you got a bunch of little creatures, you got out a few anthems to make your creatures actually deal real damage. You have some buff spells, and you have like an aura on your commander that makes it bigger. And then you're going to draw your citywide burst, and you're going to go, oh, all of my creatures have power and toughness 4. This is just a Wrath, but it doesn't affect some of my opponent's creatures. The problem with this kind of Wrath is that in the deck that wants it, it also wants to make its creatures bigger. Do I think that takes it anywhere below B tier? No. I mean, it has its niche. It has like a really strong versatility in that niche. But man, is it not getting anywhere close to A tier. I think it gets even below Chroma's Vengeance. And honestly, I'm going to switch these around a little bit because I think the sheer pop everythingness of Chroma's puts it above the, sometimes I reanimate a creature. But this does pop artifacts too. This only pops enchantments. That's the only thing. You know what? I was wrong to even doubt myself. I am the smartest motherfucker to ever live. Mabizabadisp. So you're going to hear this when I talk about colorless wraths. Mabizabadisp is, or Nevin Earl's Disc is like a bad card in my opinion. Having to wait a full turn sucks. Having Disc untapped with something makes it real strong though. Your decks that are on Voltaic Key, on Voltaic Servant, on Manifold Key is going to make Disc actually really strong because they get to go, or your Clock of Omens, there are so many cards that untap artifacts. And with Nev's Disc being able to go, hey, I'm going to play Nev's Disc and immediately untap it. So I have access to that Wrath now is real strong. Magus of the Disc, you have to go through a lot of steps to do that. You have to play Magus of the Disc. Then you have to play like a Village Bell Ringer to untap all creatures you control. Then you have to equip it with like a Lightning Greaves or a Swiftfoot Boots. You end up spending like 2 or 3 cards into making your Nev's Disc untap. Well, Nev's Disc has to spend, 1 additional card. So I honestly think Magus of the Disc is like, when I say Nevin Earl's Disc is real bad, I think this card is real bad. I can imagine a universe where I'm building a really budget, really low powered deck. I'm talking like a 4. And I say, you know what this 4 control list needs in it? It needs a 7 mana instant speed Wrath. There's a world. There's a world where I'm playing a deck that only operates at instant speed. And I need a Wrath. And I'm like, I refuse to put a sorcery in this deck. I imagine there's a timeline where Magic prints a commander that says, for every instant in your graveyard, do something cool. Or if your deck is all instants, do something really strong. That I'm going to look at this list and I'm going to say, Fated Retribution has its niche. Sure. I just don't think Magus of the Disc has that. I don't think there's a making all of your permanents indestructible, so this only pops your opponent's cards. Sure, a Chroma's Vengeance. A deck where you're only allowed to play permanents in it, and you're not allowed to play, instants and sorceries. They're just better permanents. There's Sunblast Angel. There's Realm Cloak Giant. A card where you want to have, a Zerda deck where you're playing Zerda in the companion zone and you're playing red-white, so you don't even have access to that many good Wraths. Just play instants and sorceries. There's no situation where I want Magus of the Disc in my deck, and I think that little of a niche makes every other factor irrelevant. Because, there are some factors of it pops everything. That makes Magus of the Disc best. But there are so many Wraths and so few niches for Magus of the Disc that I just think it's F tier. Route is an interesting one. Let's talk about Fated Retribution. This is 7 mana to pop all creatures and planeswalkers and instant speed. Route is 7 mana to pop all creatures that can't be regenerated. Can't pick off planeswalkers, which is good and bad. I want to be clear. Not popping planeswalkers is sometimes a net bonus for you, because you're going to be like looking into this card if you're playing a planeswalker deck. But also, it's a 5 mana Wrath. Like, you don't have to pay 7 for it. You can just pay 5. The problem is, when do I want that option? The answer is if I'm playing like a white-green list that makes a lot of ramp. Maybe I'm playing a white-blue list that runs like a lot of all your instances and sorceries cost 1 less card that like I can just afford to pay the extra mana to keep a route up. I think there are a lot of niches. Are there as many niches as there are for Citywide Burst? No. But I think there are enough niches to keep it pretty solidly in C tier. You'll notice I talk a lot about the cards that are interesting, like Max the Disc. Route's just not very interesting. Do I think it's good? Yeah. Do I think it's interesting? No. Let's talk about just the better version of a card we had earlier, Tragic Arrogance. For each player, you choose, not they choose, you choose an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker. Then that player sacrifices all non-land permanents. Sacrifice is interesting. It gets around Indestructible. It gets around Shroud, Hexproof. But it doesn't get around stuff like Undying and, Persist. There's ways that is worse than Exile. But each player having to sacrifice all non-land permanents, which means if your opponent, has a battle out or whatever, it's gone. There's no choosing for that one. Importantly, this card lets you choose. So if your opponent has a Soul Ring and an Arcane Signet out, you get to pick which is more important for them to keep and choose the other one. I love Tragic Arrogance. I think in certain decks where, you're playing stuff like Narset, where you might have a few non-land permanents that are like mandatory for you to keep out, this card's real strong. It certainly has its niches. There are certain decks like, I want to say Zergo, because I'm so in 2016 when it comes to playing like Voltron decks. I just don't build Voltron decks anymore. There's a universe where you're playing a Voltron deck like Light Paws, and you're like, Tragic Arrogance, Lightning Greaves, the biggest aura that's on Light Paws and Light Paws, so I get to keep my big idiot. Like, I want Tragic Arrogance in my deck. Also, fun fact, you can pick a creature, and then you can pick an aura your opponent controls that's equipped to a different creature. So their whole board of enchantments dies without you having to select anything good. I think this card's solidly in B tier, and honestly, I think it's probably up here. I think it doesn't have really a good niche for itself most of the time, but I think that it's just so generically good that it can really fit into like any niche. Moyojin of Cleansing Fire. So this is the most expensive Wrath we've seen today. It's up there with Play of the Game. Enters with a divinity counter, but only if you cast this spell from your hand. It has Indestructible if it has a divinity counter. Remove a divinity counter, pop every other creature. Now, there is a card called That Which Was Taken that allows you to pay mana and tap it to put a divinity counter on target creature. There are other Moyojins that also have really strong abilities that also have Indestructible. So only destroying and not exiling is pretty good. 8 mana is so much. 8 mana is like, you don't understand how much 8 mana is. 8 mana is like a lot. 8 mana is just so incredibly much mana. Am I playing this deck? Am I playing this card in any just normal deck? Any big white deck? Again, me. No, this card's so bad. Am I playing this in a deck that's going to ramp to like 50 mana and is just going to consistently be able to not care about mana? No, there's so many better cards you could be playing. But am I playing this in a Spirit typal deck that's going to have a lot of mana? It's going to have cards like Omniscience. It's going to have all the other Myogens, you know, this is a build around. We're going to play it, which was taken, and get to Wrath every single turn. No, I'm not. Like, even among the other Moyagins, like, the other ones are just so much better. This one's so bad. And if you've already spent the counter off of one of them, this one just clears it. And, like, they're also 8 mana. Like, no, it's bad. No, it's bad. Is it F tier bad? No, there's probably a niche where this gets played somewhere. It's definitely D tier bad, though. 5 mana. Choose a creature control. Each opponent chooses a creature with lesser power. If you chose a creature this way, exile each creature not chosen by a player this way. So it says, hey, I'm going to choose my best creature. Hopefully a creature with a pretty low power. Your opponents are going to have to choose a creature they control with a pretty low power, which might not be their best creature. Usually will not be their best creature. So there's 2 ways this plays out. One, you're playing dinosaurs, and you want to keep a Gishath out. You need to keep a Gishath out. So you Sculpted Sunburst, you keep your Gishath. Each opponent basically gets to choose whatever creature they control. Maybe there's a counters deck, maybe there's an auras deck that has, like, 20/20s, and they get Wrathed out of the game. But most players are going to get to choose their best creature. Or you're playing a deck like Alesha, and you're going to choose your Alesha, and your opponents are going to have to choose a 1-drop or a 1-power creature or a 0-power creature. And you're just going to get a 5-mana Wrath that gets to keep around a creature. So if we're paying 5 mana for a Wrath that keeps around a creature, why are we not playing Tragic Arrogance, where you get to choose, not the opponents? Why aren't we playing Starfall Invocation, where we're just going to Wrath the whole board, but we get to reanimate, meaning we get Enter the Battlefield triggers, we get Leaves the Battlefield triggers, Why aren't we playing just better cards, is my problem with Sculpted Sunburst. It's very cute. I love, the art. Cute kitten. Love it. That keeps it out of D tier on its own. But, is it really that good? No. It's just fine. Slaughter the Strong. So, remember when I was talking about this card, and I said if this card said power? Sheesh. Well, this one does. Slaughter the Strong. Each player chooses a creature, any number of creatures they control, total power 4 or less than sex all other creatures they control. This goes in S tier. No, it goes at the top of B. Let's talk about why it goes in the top of B. Because if you have a 4-power commander, this is 3 mana, wipe all creatures except for your commander, and all your opponents get to choose 4 power worth of, safe creatures. If you're playing a token deck, you get to pick 4 creatures, usually, and then pop everything else. If you're playing a Walls deck, you're going to have a 3 mana, 1-sided Wrath, which is a lot. And I think, is it strong in every deck? No. There are plenty of decks where Slaughter the Strong is actively bad in. But I think getting around Indestructible, getting around Shroud, getting around Hexproof, this card gets around a lot of things. And in its deck that it's the niche in, it's like one of the strongest cards in that deck, period. Which makes Slaughter the Strong solidly B tier for me. Doesn't creep it into A yet, but it makes it solidly B tier for me. Stick together. Each player chooses a party from among the creatures they control, then sack the rest. A cleric, a rogue, a warrior, and a wizard. Is your commander a cleric, a rogue, a warrior, and or a wizard? Does your deck contain a lot of cards that are the other type, just coincidentally? Is your commander a cleric in a red-blue deck? Or, a white-blue deck. And you're looking through your cards and you're like, oh, I play a lot of wizards. Then maybe consider a Stick Together in your list. The problem is that this card is actively bad, and it's going in D tier. I've already told you. But there's going to be a world where you're playing a party deck that its whole point is getting together a party, and Stick Together is going to be the best Wrath in the game. And because of that, I have to put it in D tier. You might be thinking, why is Realmcloak Giant better? Right? Realmcloak Giant is also pretty bad, but in a giant deck, it's really strong. You're saying the same thing for Stick Together. Why is Rumcloak Giant so much higher? One, I like that card more. Two, importantly, Stick Together lets your opponent also choose a party. You know how many decks run mono giants? Almost none. You know how many decks run a giant here or there? Still almost none. Go crack your deck boxes open and see how many incidental giants you're playing. That just doesn't happen. But you know how many incidental wizards you play? Warriors, clerics. Like, Stick Together, often you're going to leave your opponents with a pretty decent card. Rumcloak Giant's just going to wrath. False Prophet is a creature, which is interesting. We don't see very many of those here. When it's put into the graveyard, exile all creatures. You have to have a sack outlet for this, or another removal spell, or an opponent who's willing to make a attack into you to let you block with this card. If you do it, though, it's a 4-mana exile all creatures. It's pretty solid. I'm not gonna lie, it's like, okay. I have to think of a deck where I want to put this. Maybe a deck that has reanimate spells that can keep bringing this back over and over again. Does that deck want exile removal? No. But does that deck probably also run a sack outlet? So we don't really care? Yeah. Honestly. Pretty solid C tier. I can't with good conscience put it above Route, but I think it's pretty solid. I think there's probably a deck where this card's like really strong in. And I think there are a lot of decks where this card is pretty mid in, which I think is exactly what it needs to be to go into C tier. Kratar's Wrath. Pop all creatures, they can't be regenerated. And then Threshold, if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, which is laughably easy, instead pop all creatures, then make 2/1/1 spirits. I think it's above Reiterate for sure, but below Mags the Disc. This is 6 mana. Have you seen our 6 mana Wrath so far? There's Sunblast Angel, which is repeatable. Akroma's Vengeance, which has cycling and it pops everything, not just creatures. Like, they're exile all creatures. This just destroys all creatures that can't be regenerated. This isn't the 90s. We don't play regeneration anymore. This card's niche is far dead. There's a reason why this card's uncommon. It's shit. F tier. No questions asked. If I see you with a Kurtar's Wrath in your deck, I'm meeting you in the parking lot. Do not play this against me, because that's an insult to me as a deck builder and a player. Sublime Exaltation. Cost 1 less for each opponent. Pop all creatures. We're playing Commander. Let's do the math. 4 mana to destroy all creatures. You know what else is 4 mana to destroy all creatures? Wrath. F tier. Now I'm just getting mad. Are you? If you're playing at 6-player tables consistently, stop. Cleansing Nova. Choose 1, pop all creatures. No, okay. So, pop all creatures or pop all artifacts and enchantments. Sure. Top of C tier. There are universes where I want to play Cleansing Nova in a deck. Usually they're universes where I'm playing mono white and I run a lot of creatures, and I know that there are going to be some situations where I need a Wrath but don't want to pop all creatures. In those situations, I think there are probably better cards, but I think Cleansing Nova is like a card I would choose. Harsh Mercy. This is another one of those, each player gets to pick their favorite little guys to stick around. Each player picks a creature type. Pop every creature that isn't chosen this way. This means if one player chooses human to stick around their commander, and everyone else, we're playing magic, so we have human creatures, we get to keep all humans. It grants a really interesting decision for each player this way, because they have to decide, if I have 4 humans out, one of which is my commander, but there are 10 humans at the table, do I pick human or do I pick Artificer, because my commander's Urza, to only keep around Urza? Or do I let all my humans live, but also the rest of the table's humans live? It's interesting. If I was playing a mono-white type of list that, was playing mono-white spirits, mono-white slivers, is a deck, I guess. Mono-white humans. I could see playing Harsh. Probably not mono-white humans, because I think humans just leaves too much on the table. But I think it's got the problem of Tragic Arrogance, where often your Wrath or not Tragic Arrogance, sorry. It's got the problem that a lot of these choose 1 Wraths do, where oftentimes you want to cast a Wrath to destroy one threat and also the rest of the table goes. And Harsh Mercy just lets that threat live, which I think is keeping it out of B tier. I think it's just really, really solidly keeping it out of B tier. It's probably not at the bottom of B tier. It's probably like here. I just liked Realm Clone Giant more. This art kind of sucks. Realm Cloak Giant's got a really good art. Urza's Ruinous Blast. Only can cast if you control a legendary creature or a planeswalker. Exile all non-land permanents, that aren't legendary. 5 mana. So it's not 6, which is, the normal cost of exiling everything. And it keeps around legendaries. This keeps around commanders, yes. It also keeps around all of your legendary permanents if you're playing a Legends deck. If you're playing a deck that's entirely based around Legends, if you're playing a deck that's entirely based around Planeswalkers, Urza's Ruinous Blast kills everything but your board. It's a one-sided exile removal spell. And one-sided exile removal spells is hanging around the A tier. The question is it hanging around S? It's absurdly powerful in its niche. Its niche is big. Its niche isn't Realm Cloak Giant niche. Like, Legends is a big deck. Planeswalkers is a big deck. There are plenty of big decks that this card fits into. The question is, does it go in to S tier? And I think the answer is yes. I've put this card in plenty of decks. I think I will continue to. The Legend sub-theme is just too powerful for this card to get anywhere under S. It being a Legend sometimes matters with cards like the Call, that's 3 mana white, tutors up a Legend. Like, this card is genuinely incredibly powerful. Slash the ranks, pop all creatures and planeswalkers except commanders. Sure. Are we all happy with it being at the bottom of B tier? I don't think this card's interesting because, a lot of these, each player chooses a creature. That's what's happening. Now, this is important because if your opponent has like a 30-30 rando, this doesn't let them choose that. Like, they have to pick their, like, random Simic idiot that they chose to put in the command zone. But, like, am I happy about it? What deck am I putting this in that needs the niche? Light Paws, decks that want to buff up its commander. Are there better options? Maybe. Maybe if I'm playing partners, this card's really sick. Like if I'm playing like Ikra Shadiki and the white-blue guy. Maybe there are partner pairings that are like 2 Ravos and Tana, like 2 big commanders that I want to keep around, and Slash the Ranks is like really strong in. I think that's enough for me to put it a teensy bit higher because I think that partner scenario is like pretty decent. And also popping Planeswalkers is never going to be bad. Hallowed Burial. Put all creatures on the bottom of their library. This card would probably be solidly B, except for the card Terminus. I'm not going to get into it, but Terminus is almost strictly better than Hallowed Burial, and for that reason, it's going in the middle of C tier. We're just not going to talk about it too much because I'm going to talk about it more when we get to Terminus. Sunscour is absurdly interesting. Destroy all creatures, 7 mana, bad, right? D tier. But you may exile 2 white cards from your hand rather than paying this card's mana cost. So you want to be playing white. You want to be playing white-green, where you have a lot of cards like Shamanic Revelation that draw you a whole bunch of cards. You want to be playing white-blue, where you have a bunch of cards that let you draw like your whole deck. In those situations, Sunscour is kind of broken. You get a Wrath without paying a single dime into it. Do I think those situations are going to come up a lot? Not necessarily. Do I think there are going to be definite situations where I go, I'm willing to pay 3 cards out of my hand to Wrath the board with a normal 6-card hand. I'm willing to dump half of my hand to pop all creatures so that I have enough mana to get out my like absurdly broken commander, my Narset. Again, I bring up Narset a lot because Narset's broken. Am I willing to do that a lot of the time? Yeah. So I think this is going to fall into C tier. Where is it falling into C tier? Probably below Route. I think I want to put Route into a deck more often than I want to put Sunscour into a deck, because in mono white, which is where this card would be optimal, obviously, there's not a lot of card draw, and so it kind of sucks that this is the color they chose for it. I get why. It's because of the things I just said, but I think it's pretty middling. Huh? Well, anyways, back to what I was saying. Temporary lockdown. When it enters battle, it's an enchantment. Exile all non-land permanents with CMC 2 or less until this leaves the battlefield. So there's a lot of decks that have a lot of cards with CMC 2 or less in them. There are not a lot of white decks that have a lot of cards with CMC 3 or greater, which is what you want, right? You want a deck like a Brago list, where you're playing a lot of Mull Drifters and, you know, Cloud Skates and a lot of cards that are big, and also that can flicker temporary lockdown to keep shutting things down. This is decent if, like, opponents keep playing stuff like Soul Ring and Signets and Big Ramp, and you kind of want to slow everyone down. This is also a big target for enchantment removal. This is a Wrath that can be responded to. Also, this could be responded to by your own cards. I mean, if you want to play a bunch of ramp, maybe you're like a Stormish white deck, play a bunch of ramp, temp lockdown, pop your own temp lockdown to get that ramp back, tap it down, maybe get back the temp lockdown. Maybe this is a weird card in like an Open the Vaults list that wants to like temp lockdown all of its ramp because it runs a lot of ramp, and then sack temp lockdown, and then open the vaults temp lockdown while also opening the vaults all their ramp back, so they get to float it all. Temp lockdown comes down, locks everything down, sack temp lockdown, float it all again. This could like 4x your mana rocks. But is that happening a lot of the time? No. Is it happening enough to keep it out of D tier? No. This card is just so absurdly niche. I'm not even sure if we would call it. Oh, I just picked up the wrong card. Well, anyways, I just don't think... I think it's so niche, I don't think it's even worth really calling it a Wrath. And because it's so niche and it's not really worth calling it a Wrath, it's going at the bottom of D tier. I just said so much exciting things that this card could do, but it's just not a Wrath. So it's staying out. So, I wonder where this card goes, by the way. Because I don't recognize that art really well. So that could happen at any time. So that card I was talking about, Terminus. Put all creatures in the bottom of the library. This gets around everything. It gets around Indestructible, it gets around Persist, it gets around Undying, it gets around Shroud, Hexproof, it gets around, everything. But if you Terminus a creature, it can be tutored up. Your library can be shuffled and you can draw into it. It's not going to get rid of it forever like Exile does. Importantly, this is Miracle. Meaning if you can stack your deck, which a lot of decks can. You have stuff like Mystical Tutor, a Terminus, feels real strong. Stuff like a Aminatua deck can put Terminus on top. Any deck that runs a Brainstorm can put Terminus on top. Then you pay 1 mana to remove all creatures. You don't get a combat step, which sucks. But you get 1 mana, remove all creatures. And then you get to build your board up after it. Like, that's a good enough niche that I think it falls pretty solidly into C tier. It definitely goes above the 5 mana version of it because, yeah, it feels worse when you pay 6 mana for it, but you're paying 1 for it. In the deck that you're putting Terminus into your deck, you're paying 1 for it. When you pay 6 for it, you kind of feel bad. So I think this falls pretty solidly into the top of C tier. Actually, falls pretty solidly into the bottom of B. Let's be real. Its niche it's strong enough in its niche that it should fall into the B tier. Split up, pop all tapped creatures, or pop all untapped creatures. Sure. I mean, here's the thing. When this card got first spoiled, I said, this card's broken. Because if you're playing, a bunch of untapped creatures, brother, I know one way to dab all your creatures. Move a ding dang combat step. Swing them. Punch somebody. And then once you punch somebody, then you blow up all untapped creatures. Or, run that shit sideways. If you're seeing a bunch of tapped creatures, go to your untap step. Let them untap. Main phase 1 split up. Pop the entire opponent's board. But I've been noticing there's a lot of situations where I'm staring at a split up and I'm going like, man, this is like, there's both of them. Like, I'm staring down a 30-30 commander that this idiot's been swinging with every single turn that, like, I want to remove, but also the rest of the board's untapped. Opposite, I've been looking at a light pause that's been, vigilant the whole game, and everyone's swinging, and I'm scared, and I'm about to piss myself, but split up isn't going to help me with both them problems. It's going to either wrap the board and hand the game to light pause, or it's going to remove light pause, and I'm spending 3 mana on a destroy removal spell, which I don't want to do. It's just very mediocre, and I think mediocre means it's going to fall near the Sunscour place in C. I honestly think that this card, I hyped it up a lot before it got announced, before it got, in front of me, and now that it's in front of me, I don't really care. So chat, when I do this, I want you all to realize that this card's bad, like really, really, really bad. If we're being real, it's probably here. I think it's still better than Retaliate, because Retaliate's such a bad card, but it's bad. 10 mana. Sorcery. I have seen the end of times, a future in which all our kinds are torn from this world. Banger flavor text. What's the actual text on it? Pop all. I'm sorry, I almost threw up. Non-artifact permanents. So I can hear what you're thinking. Alex, 10 mana is not that bad. I don't think you've read this card. It destroys lands. And you can play cards that make all of your lands artifacts. So then Soul Scour is actually pretty strong, huh? Right? Our artifact decks run a lot of ramp. Why are you so mad on this card? It's because. Do you know what artifacts can do with 10 mana? Genuinely. If an artifact deck has 10 mana on the battlefield, they can perform Cold Fusion. They can do whatever they want. If an artifact player tapped out 10 mana and picked up my deck and threw it across the room, I wouldn't even get mad, because that's their God-given right. You want me to get to 10 mana in an artifact deck to play a one-sided Wrath with extra steps that I have to play into? No, I'm just not doing it. Not only that, it's the worst kind of one-sided Wrath, because it's going to one-sided Wrath. You're going to be in a really winning position. I'm still going to have a Soul Ring. I'm going to have an Arcane Signet. This card's just so bad. It's going to get rid of all my mana rocks, but leave me with just enough to spite you with every last ounce of my being. I can still exile your artifacts that are good. And what happens when you set up this whole big brain Mycosynth play, and then I naturalize it? Now we're spending 2 more hours on this stupid game when you could have spent 10 mana on any other Magic the Gathering card. No. Soul Scour is not getting anywhere close to the reaches of D tier. This card's just terrible. Day of Judgment. There's a reason why this card's in Foundation, folks. 4 mana, sorcery speed, destroy all creatures, period. Also, read that flavor text. Clerics on both sides prayed for divine intervention to end the war. The gods that didn't play favorites. Beautiful. Absolutely stunning flavor. If this card isn't absolutely the middle of B and C tier, I don't know what is. Have I put Day of Judgment in decks before? Yeah. Have I put Wrath of God into the decks before? Yeah. Why am I putting him there? Why am I putting Day of Judgment over Wrath of God? I have a couple cards in my deck that reanimate, or that regenerate. My commander has regeneration. Sure. No comment. Pop all creatures, gain life. This goes about here. Its niche is you're playing a life gain deck. Is this card decent for life gain decks? Yeah. It's alright. It's not bad. There's a universe where you gain like 20 life out of this, and you feel pretty dang good about yourself. No, now that's a Wrath with an ass on it. So, sorry, it's getting a little hot in here. Elish Norn is a 7 mana vigilant 4/7 that says other creatures you control get +2/+2. Other creatures your opponent control get -2/-2. Some players will say this isn't a Wrath. I beg to differ. I think if you've ever played against this card, you think this card is for sure a Wrath. Because, man, giving -2/-2 to your whole board feels like game over. It feels so game over. It also stays forever. Like, you have to have a removal spell to actually get this card off the board, but by the time you play an Elish Norn, there's probably other cards you also want to remove. It feels real bad to have this cast against you. Feels so bad. We're putting it in A tier. We're putting it in A tier. Cinema. This card says, fuck your board, and also stay fucked, loser. Like, this is a forever and ever Wrath. I think I will put, every time I put an Elish Norn in a deck, and then I draw it, I feel good that I drew it, and I think that's exactly the criteria that keeps a card in A tier. Flash Flying 7-drop, 5/4, exile all attacking creatures if you cast from hand. This card wants to be Sunblast Angel so fucking bad. It really does. So, do you remember this little fun card down here? Hold up, I'm just gonna keep this here for just a second. Don't worry about why. Do you remember this card down here? Destroy all attacking creatures. Okay, well, let's read this card. So, 7 mana for a 5/4 that if you cast from hand, exile all attacking creatures. Well, I'm going to move on. Hopefully, I didn't forget anything anywhere. Doomscar. This was a really interesting one. I saw this card and I went, that's probably going to be like the only foretell card that every white deck plays. I was right. 5 mana, destroy all creatures with no extra text was enough for me to sentence this card to the very bottom of F tier. This is 5 mana, destroy all creatures, but it does have a tiny benefit. If you pay 2 mana, you can basically, Klarna pay for a little bit of a discount in the future. And man, do I love 3 mana destroy all creatures. 3 mana destroy all creatures was enough to get this card into B tier. And like, that's saying a lot. So it's starting here for me. Now, is there a deck where you care about casting spells from exile? Then this card's probably better than most Wraths. Is there a deck that plays a bunch of indestructible cards and doesn't want all these fancy little like sacrifice and exile stuff? This card's probably better than most Wraths. Is there a deck where you're going to have access to a lot of mana at random points, but you're not really looking to ramp out, so you kind of want to be able to just spend 2 now, spend 3 later. You're not getting to 10 mana to be able to play a Wrath and your commander. This card's probably better than most. And you know what? I put it there for a second, and I think it's staying right there. I like Doomscar. Not enough to put it into any like A tiers, but I think it's perfect right where it is. Destroy all creatures and all permanents attached to creatures. 5 mana. So whenever you destroy a creature, generally, all auras are already getting destroyed. If the creature has indestructible, this will help that. But this card also hates out equipments. Now, you know what card also hates out equipments? Chroma's Vengeance. You know what card also hates out equipments? This one that I already forgot the name of. You know what also hates out equipments? Tragic Arrogance. This card does something sweet that 14 other cards do, which I think is like the perfect D tier card. Of like, yes, this has a niche, But you know what that niche is? Decks that don't play equipments and also want a 5-mana Wrath and also really hate equipments. And if you are in a relationship where you genuinely hate equipments enough to play Wraths just to beat equipments, you need a better play group. And I mean that with my whole heart. Unstable Glyph Bridge. The last few artifacts that we've gotten have not done great, so let's hope this one helps. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, don't love that text. It's why Sunblast Angel's in F tier or in S tier. And the other angels in F. Choose a creature with for each player. Choose a creature with power 2 or less that player controls. Pop all other creatures except for creatures chosen this way. That's interesting. So, let's talk about a card that's like very similar to that. Where was it? Did I put it all the way in F tier? That doesn't sound right. Where's a card that it seems like it would be a C tier card. It's this one. So it says you choose a creature you control. Everyone chooses a creature they control with power less than it. This is the same thing, but you get to make that choice. But you can't pick around a big card. But I think if you're playing this card, you probably are going to be picking a pretty little creature. So I think it's definitely above that. Also, it's an artifact, which might matter. You can play a tutor for it. Also, it has a craft flip. We're not going over the craft because we're really going over these cards based on their wrath potential. And I think, but it definitely adds some points that it can flip into a better card later. I think we're going to put it right here. Right here. And you know what? This card's probably around here. If we're being real. Yeah. I like where that is. It's fine. You getting to make the choice is a lot better than your opponent getting to make the choice. But a lot of the time, this is going to be like a false choice because your opponent's only going to have one of these cards and you're going to have to stick with it. Battle of Bywater. Pops all creature with power 3 or greater. Make a food for each creature you control. Let's talk about why. So you might be thinking that, this is just Slaughter the Strong. But weirder. Importantly, power 3 or greater is such an important line. Because 1, walls exist. And you know what walls have? Power 0. And this card's broken in walls, which was enough to get Slaughter the Strong all the way to the top of B tier. 2, you know what also exists? That Doll Commander that cares about all your creatures having power 2 or less. You know what also exists? Alesha, which reanimates creature with power 2 or less. You know what also exists? Luris, which is going to die to this, but it's also going to, reanimate cards with CMC 3 or less, which are going to have power 2 or less. You know what also exists? Blink decks that are going to be blinking cards like Psalm Simulacrum, a 2/2, Muldrifter, a 2/2. You know what decks really like this card? Decks that care about a bunch of tokens. Because you know what this card says? Pop all creatures, except for your tiny tokens, and then make a bunch of food tokens. This is a insane wrath in 15 different archetypes. And that is what carries it to a place in S tier. It is just an insanely good one-sided wrath in 15 different archetypes. Oh boy. You get an energy. Then you may pay 1 or more energy. When you do, each creature you control with power equal to the amount of energy paid this way gains indestructible. Pop all creatures. So, do I want to play 5 mana for... Do I want to pay 5 mana for a Wrath in an energy deck where I can pay 6 energy to give my whole board indestructible? Probably not. It might find a spot in there, but it's not exciting to me. Is it exciting enough to play it in the deck? Probably. That gives it a niche. That puts it above D tier because it has a niche that you're going to want to play this deck in all your energy decks. Do I want to put it in a real deck? No. It's quite bad in a real deck because power 1 is so much more niche than power 2. All those things that I just mentioned for battle were all power 2. This says, except for walls, this says power 1. Do I want to put this in a wall deck? No. You want to know why? Because I want to play battle, and I want to play Slaughter the Strong, and I want to play better cards than this. It's better than bad. This card is honestly only here because Terminus is here, which sucks. Because I feel like this card should be a higher rated card, but Terminus is just such a better card that does the same thing, so I think it's lower. It sucks. Man, I really have to decide how far I want to go with this joke. So Mass Calcified destroys all non-white creatures. The point is you're playing a 7-drop Wrath. That's a one-sided Wrath because you're playing mono white. It's going to leave some things alive, but on a whole, it's a 1-drop. Make your bones strong. Doesn't affect me, which is nice. No comment. Top of D tier. You know, I think that's about the safest place for me to be right now, is no comment, top of D tier. Planar Cleansing. This is a Classico pop all non-land permanents, 6 mana. This card used to be played in every single commander deck. Nowadays, it's really not, because they've just printed so many better versions of this card. It's not F tier. It's probably about here. Just because, like, it's like the Terminus effect, where this card is good enough to probably be at the top of C tier, but Terminus exists, and Terminus is just an absurdly better card. This card is probably good enough to be at, like, bottom of C tier, but because there's, like, Hour of Promise, or Hour of Devastation, whatever that card is, this card's just not good enough. Yeah, Hour of Revelation. This card's just not good enough. Unfortunately. I want to get banned for this one. Oh boy. Non-white creatures get -1/-1, and also that art. Bad, horrible, weird. If you're playing mono white, this card doesn't affect you. It also can remove some random tokens. You know what most tokens are? White. This card's an F tier. But I will say, if I see you playing Krikar's Wrath, or this, or this, or this, or this, I'm going to accost you in real life. But if I see you playing Holy Light, I am going to think it's funny. And I think that funniness factor carries it to the top of F tier easily. Speaking of cards, Pop All Goblins. We're just going to get this off the screen real quick, but Destroy All Goblins is also going into the F tier. It's going about here in F tier because I can't imagine a deck where I want to play Mags of the Disc, but there's a universe where I want to make all creatures gain all creature types, and in that universe, this is just a 3-mana Wrath. But that's a convoluted combo deck that I've tried building 4 times, playing all the hate pieces against, you know, creature types, and then playing like Maskwood Nexus, and then playing the card that exiles a non-land permanent control and then gifts it to each other player to make all their creatures become all creature types. And what I've gone to is that one day WotC is going to print a commander that is built around that concept, and when they do, those cards will probably go way up in price. So I bought them just to like keep them around, but for now, deck's bad. Righteous Fury, 6 mana. 6 mana, brother. Destroy all tapped creatures. Gain 2 life for each creature destroyed this way. It's like... it truly is like Fumigate, but worse. We're getting to some old cards, and I think this card is going straight with the other old cards. It goes a little bit below... It goes a little bit above the Goblin Murder because... I don't know. No, it goes below it. Because I can imagine a deck where Goblin Murder sees play in like 2 years when they print the cards for it. Righteous Fury will never go into a deck. Okay, so I put this card down here because even at its absolute best, it's going to be worse than Wrath of God. This is just worse than another card in F tier, which I think puts it at absolute 0. Martyr's Cry. Man, these old cards have some art on them. Exile all white creatures. For each creature exiled this way, its controller draws a card. This card is a combination of, it's a Wrath, but also it's a Wrath that if you have a bunch of white creatures out like tokens, you can basically cash them in to draw cards. Problem is, this card's white, so you can't even use it as like a hate piece in a different deck. I think it's still an F tier, but it's probably at like the peak of F tier. I don't think it's that bad. Finally, good fucking Magic cards. Exile target creature you can control, and then it's a 2 mana sorcery speed path to exile. If you overload it for 6, it's a 6 mana path to exile for all creatures all opponents control. This card sees play in CDH, which puts it up there. It is a one-sided exile board wipe at only 6 mana. That's crazy. I think it's pretty clear that this card should be at S tier. Like very clear. Oh, we found the card that we accidentally stole. For each, also importantly, Winds of Abandon is also a path if you need it. Like, that's the good part about this card, is it's also just a removal spell sometimes. Celestial Judgment. For each different power among creatures on the battlefield, choose a creature with that power to destroy each creature not chosen this way. So you play this card in a deck where you play like the Coven mechanic, right? So you want a bunch of creatures with weird powers, and then you play Celestial Judgment, and it's basically a one-sided Wrath. How do we feel about 6 mana one-sided Wrath that's going to let like a 20/20 live because our opponent happens to have a 20/20? Probably solidly B tier. Probably up like here-ish. I imagine a deck exists where I want to put this card in. Not many, but I imagine a deck exists. Unfortunately, it doesn't really do anything for your board, which, like, there are certain decks that definitely do things for your board. That's why they're all the way, up in the A and the S tier. But, like, this card doesn't really do anything for you. It just wraths pretty well. Angel of Glory's Rise has just some insane arts. Look at all of its arts. They're all amazing. Exiles all zombies. Then returns all humans from your grave to the battlefield. This card's going to be our first weird tier card, because I'm not sure where to rate this. Because on one hand, yes, it is a Wrath. I wanted to make sure every single Wrath was in this list. But, I mean, on the same token, is it really a Wrath? It exiles all zombies, but when you're really playing against a bunch of zombie decks, being able to reanimate all humans is why this card's in the deck. It's there for your blink decks that's going to reanimate all humans over and over and over again. I just don't count it as a Wrath. If it was, it would probably be low D tier because of just how incredibly niche case the scenario is. Austere Command. So it's better than Cleansing Nova. Let's start it there. Let's just put this card right next to Cleansing Nova. Choose 2. Destroy all artifacts or destroy all enchantments. Destroy all creature with mana value 3 or less. Or destroy all creature with mana value 4 or greater. So already it is 1 more mana for the exact text on Cleansing Nova. You can pop all artifacts and enchantments or destroy all creatures. What's the difference? Well, this one you can kind of finagle it. You can be like, well, obviously I have to pop all artifacts. But there's no enchantment deck on the field. So I don't really care about popping enchantments. So let's also destroy a creature with power 4 or greater, because there's somebody made a bunch of 20/20 Hydras, and I gotta answer that. Like, this is just better than Cleansing Nova, and it's so much better than Cleansing Nova. Honestly, top of B tier. Top of B tier because this card doesn't need a niche. This is for those decks that, like, I'm looking at it and I'm like, no niche weird case Wraths. I just want to put the best Wraths in the game in this deck, and Austere Command comes up. Its name shows up on my list whenever I'm looking for the best Wraths in Magic. So, because of that, and only because of that, it just slides so solidly into B tier. It doesn't advance your board state, so it doesn't get you into here, but it is a really solid Wrath. Dusk to Dawn. Pop all creature with power 3 or greater. Also, later, you can reanimate all creature with power 2 or less. Or, sorry, return to hand all creature with power 2 or less. It does stuff for you. It does advance your board state. It's very niche. You know, it only hits certain creatures. You can build around it. I think it's in the Slaughter the Strong scale. Where, like, there are certain decks where Dusk to Dawn is going to be broken. I've put Dusk to Dawn in 4 decks that I've built. So I understand that this card has its niche. But it's not, you know, it's not nearly enough to get into the A tier. Weird. If I'm not mistaken, this is our first and only Planeswalker in the list. Elspeth is 6 mana, +1 to make 3/1/1 soldiers. -3 to pop all creatures with power 4 or greater. This card's good in Planeswalker decks. Card's good in Soldier type. Card's good in token decks. Card's good in big mana white lists. And also, it's a Wrath. I think this card does so much. I'm also willing to just put it near the top of B tier. This has been a really good run, and looking at the next couple of things in this list, I feel like we're going to stay on this run. Elspeth does the Wrath job, and then it goes on to do more and stick around on your board, be really annoying to remove. Love this card. That's my opinion. Farewell's, in my opinion, the best Wrath in Magic the Gathering. I don't think another card on this list is going to beat it out. Choose one or more. Exile all artifacts. Exile all creatures. Exile all enchantments. Exile all graveyards. I mean, woof. Farewell is a card that you see it resolve, and you go, okay, the board is over. Like, we're running this whole thing back. Gets around Indestructible, gets around Undying, gets around Persist, gets around everything. And it also doesn't just, you know, leave the artifact deck way ahead. It shuts down everything. Also, if you're playing an Enchantress list, you just don't choose enchantments. If you're actually super worried about artifacts and enchantments, maybe there's a graveyard deck in the battlefield, but you have the biggest board state, just leave creatures alone. Yes, it doesn't add anything to the board. Yes, it's not repeatable like Sunblast Angel. Yes, it's not going to stick around like Elish Norn. Yes, it doesn't, you know, give you any benefit. But Farewell is, by and large, when I want to end the board state, Farewell is going to end the board state. Fell the Mighty, pop all creatures with power greater than target creature's power. This is a Wrath for Walls decks. You guys can see why a lot earlier, whenever I was picking for, I think one of these cards is down in D tier, I said that this card's really solid in Walls, but there's so many Wraths that are just too good in Walls. This is one of those where it's like, in Walls decks, in decks that run really low power, yes, this card's good, but you know what else is good? Austere Command, and Dusk, and Elspeth, and, you know, that one, and that one, and that one. Like, it just gets outpaced by better cards, and so I think it's just top of D, because it gets beat by 15 other cards. So, they made that card that we put in F tier earlier a little bit more interesting. 10 mana, pop all non-artifact creatures, not permanents, but it gives it Improvise, so we can tap out our artifacts to play for this. Oftentimes artifact decks will have artifacts that do nothing, that are just sitting around, you know, doing their passive ability, don't have to tap. So Organic Extinction can help there. This art is also really weird. This art doesn't make sense to me at all. I don't know. 10 mana is just so much. Even if you pay 5 of it off, you're still paying 5 mana just to pop all creatures that aren't artifacts. Most artifact creature decks are cards like Urza, decks like Urza, decks like the third Urza. Like, most artifact decks are like, you know, Sai, Emery. Well, Emery's not a great example, but they're decks that have non-artifact cards in the command zone. So you're going to have to, you know, you're still going to lose a bunch of creatures. It's not a one-sided ripe. So it doesn't get into B tier off the sole purpose of it's a one-sided wrath. I think it's going to sit in C tier down here where like it's a one-sided wrath, yes, but I mean, come on. Promise of Loyalty. Each player chooses a creature they control. Pop the rest. So the other important part about this card is that all the creatures that they choose are now sworn not to attack you or planeswalkers you control. I run this card in a planeswalker deck. It's alright. Every time I cast it, I feel pretty decent about it. I get to keep around like my commander, and everyone else gets to keep around their biggest creature, but I'm not threatened by them anymore because they physically can't attack me. There are universes where somebody like blinks a card or removes a counter somehow, and it feels worse, but generally, I think this card is solid enough to go at the there in the B tier. We're starting to get to the point where some of these cards are going to get cut off by the card display screen, but just know they're there. I promise. If you guys have object permanence, it'll work. This is in a line of cards that are called, I just like to call them Day of Judgment, but a little bit better. Each player who controls the most creature investigates, then destroy all creatures. This card could just say investigate, destroy all creatures, and it would be like still pretty bad. It gets one slot above Day of Judgment because it is in fact a tiny, minuscule, irrelevant amount better than Day of Judgment. Cataclysmic Gearhulk. 4/5 with Vigilance for 5. Each player chooses an artifact, creature, enchantment, and a planeswalker from among the non-land permanents they control. Sacrifice every other non-land permanent they control. So, 1, repeatable. Remember why we put Sunblast Angel in S tier? This is repeatable. You can keep bringing this back. You can keep bringing it back with like artifact reanimation, which is fun. You can blink it over and over if your opponents keep getting out of hand. The problem is, in those blink decks, you generally want to have a full board, and this card's going to get you down. I don't think it's as good as Sunblast Angel just because of that. It does hit more things, but that makes it really hard to find a deck that wants to play this. Like, the deck that wants to play this, you also have to choose Cataclysmic Gearhulk as one of your decisions. So you're going to have to choose to either wipe all your artifacts except for this card, or wipe all your creatures except for this card, unless you're just playing it as a Wrath and you're going to let it die immediately. I think all that said, it's repeatable, it's good, it's probably top B. There's a deck that I want to put this card in, but not many of them. Our Reckoning, this is just a better version of the improvised spell. It says convoke, pop all non-token creatures. This card's going in A. This card's going in A because, and you know what? So is Austere Command. Austere Command is just so generically powerful that I've had a change of heart. This card goes in A. Hour of Reckoning convokes, so you could technically spend 0 mana on it. Often you could play out your whole hand, make a ton of tokens, because you don't have to have, like, you don't have to be out of Summoning Sickness to pay for Convoke. So I could play a bunch of cards, tap all of it out to pop all non-token creatures, meaning if you're a token deck, which there are a lot of token decks, you can pop all creatures while leaving behind a substantial board state. So there's a one-sided Wrath that can also cost 0, which are the 2 things needed to get you into B tier. And I think 2 things needed to get into B tier, one-sided and cost very little, are enough to bump it all the way up to A tier. This is another Day of Judgment plus, pop all creatures, and then make an XX, where X is the number of creatures destroyed this way. Played this in Phyrexians, felt bad. Generally. I played a Phyrexian Typal deck, and I was like, oh, Phyrexian Rebirth, you know, it's kind of flavorful. And then often I would pay 6 mana to pop all creatures. It would kind of suck. I wouldn't love it. And then an opponent would go Nature's Claim, Doomblade, literally anything. And I'd go, okay, yeah, you got it. Like, it's just a Wrath that also forces your opponents to spend a removal spell, which is definitely enough to get it above No Witness, but not enough to get it anywhere real. Speaking of the card I just said, this one is the same, but it exiles all creatures, and you have to pay mana to get the creature. You get to wait a turn. Honestly, I think I'm not putting it nearly high as it should be. It should be about there. It doesn't really have a niche. That's its problem. You get to make an artifact token, which gets +1/+1 counters. So maybe there's a +1/+1 counters deck that cares about Sunfall. But generally, right, you're just getting rid of the board and also having a tiny benefit, which there are better cards that do both of those things. What a magic card Solar Tide is. Choose one, 6 mana, pop all creatures with power 2 or less, pop all creature with power 3 or greater. Entwine, sacrifice 2 lands. If you were to do both of these effects, you have to get rid of your whole board, obviously, and you have to sack 2 lands. No more talking about this card. Damning Verdict. Pop all creature with no counters on them. Wait, what? Oh, wrong card. This card's more like a B tier. This card's more up here. Because, like, it has a niche. Like, this card is incredible. Being able to just, like, pop all creatures, but also keep around all of your creatures makes it very one-sided. There are plenty of decks that can spread around +1/+1 counters. There are plenty of decks that can't spread around +1/+1 counters, but are of the opinion that, like, if my card doesn't have counters on it, it's not worth saving, right? Hydra decks are going to love this card. It has so many good decks that play it that I think Damning Verdict is pretty obviously incredibly strong. Martial Coup. Create X/1/1 white soldiers. If X is 5 or more, destroy all other creatures. Only reason why this card is not higher than, like, the bottom of B tier is 1, it costs 7 mana, and 2, there's a better card coming up that we'll get to. But, you know, if you're playing a token deck, think about Martial Coup. Look at that art. Beautiful. The color tones, and it's just really pretty. Pop all non-land all non-land creatures for 5 mana. If you want to pay 8 mana, you're also going to make a creature. This card has its niche. There are land creature decks out there. That's going to keep it, you know, it's going to keep it above D tier. Not very high, though. I don't think it's nearly as strong as Realm Cloak Giant. One thing to say is that no one's going to accidentally play a non-land or a land creature, right? No one's accidentally putting giants in their deck. No one's accidentally playing land creatures in their deck. So Planar Outburst is usually going to be one-sided. The problem is the difference between it and something like Damning Verdict that pops creature with counters is that Planar Outburst is one-sided, but the cards that you're saving are oftentimes, you know, hard to get out, and you often have a lot of cards like your Tatiovas, your cards that animate the lands that are gonna die to Planar Outburst. So it's not fully one-sided, you know. Balancing Act. Each player chooses a number of permanents, this includes lands, equal to the number of permanents controlled by the player who chose the furthest. And then we sack all of the rest. We discard cards the same way. Often we're going to be discarding down to 0 or 1 cards, so this better be good. The problem with this card over a card like Balance is with Balance, you can sack all your creatures so that Balance is a board wipe. With this, your opponent could choose, like, okay, say we're choosing 10 permanents. An opponent could just say, fuck it, we ball 10 creatures. Another opponent could say, well, I'll just lose all my creatures, keep my 10 lands, my mana producers, maybe my biggest creature. It's definitely a balancing act, and I think it's not doing a very good job at it. The fact that it says permanence really sucks, too. Um, Maybe there's an open the vaults styled. Also, the fact that you can't balancing act into like heroic intervention or something. None of those stop it. Is a blessing and a curse. But man, does a Teferi's protection fuck. Like Teferi's balancing act says each player sacks all permanents they control, and you have to have your own Teferis to get out of it. So does Teferi's protection plus this make it higher? Yeah, definitely. That much higher? No. But that is a 2-card combo. And you know what? This is our first Wrath that has a combo. So it goes up there. Whoa! Elspeth's being joined by our second Planeswalker. Has a bunch of text. Neg 4, which you can do immediately. Each player, choose a creature that player controls. Each player sacrifices all other creatures not chosen this way. Huh. Weird, wacky. So I did say it has a lot of other weird text, but I will read some of it. No more than 1 creature can attack this each combat, and 0 to make it 2/2 with double strike. That's important because it means usually this card sticks around for a while and generates creatures just like Elspeth. Also, if you're in a Planeswalker deck, this card's broken because, you know, you really like having Wraths in that deck, and also being a Planeswalker means it's easily tutorable, means you run a lot of synergies with it, means you can like keep it around and get a bunch of value out of it. I think this card's a pretty solid B tier. It doesn't go in many decks. The decks it goes in, it fucks in. Hey, remember when I said there's a card that's better than Martial Coup? This card is better than Martial Coup, but just barely. It is, you gain X life, and then those 1/1s become mites with Toxic 1 and can't block. If you're playing an Infect deck, maybe you're in White Sun's Twilight as a Wrath. Other than that, it's just slightly better Martial Coup. Not going to talk about it that much. Descend Upon the Sinful, a beautiful art. I love Goth Avacyn. It's like my favorite thing in Magic, period. Exile all creatures, make a 4/4 if you're Delirious. Now, should this card realistically go right here? Because it's basically just a slightly better exile all creatures. Yes, it should. Does Goth Avacyn make it go into C tier instead? Yeah. Because I make the rules, and when I see Goth Avacyn, I just get to choose to put it in a different tier, and there's nothing you can do about it. Final Showdown. Instant speed. So let's start here. 5 mana, destroy all creatures. It is 6 mana, so it's just a little tiny bit better than Rout on average. You can also +1 to give a creature you control indestructible, meaning it's going to be a 7 mana, destroy all creatures, but you get to keep 1. You can also pay 1 more to make all creatures lose all abilities, meaning you're going to get around indestructible. Meaning you're going to get around, you know, a lot of important abilities. I like it. You know what? I like it so much. You get to go solidly above Wrath of God. Probably about here. We can get a little crazy with it. Let's put it here. When this card got spoiled, everyone was like putting it in everything. People still put it in everything. Just don't think it's that strong. I've seen it played, and every time I've seen it played, it's kind of felt weak because you really don't get to build anything off of it. You get to play your 1 Wrath, and that's the end of your turn. But, you know, it's decent enough. I'll let it go. Magenta the Lion. This is our first Magic card, I believe, that can go into the command zone. 5 mana for a 3/3 Spell Shaper, my favorite creature type, and that's not a joke. Pay 4 mana, tap it, and pitch 2 cards to destroy all creatures except for Magenta the Lion. So let's talk about all the reasons why this is way better than Magus to the Disc. 1, it doesn't pop itself. 2, it can be your commander. That's the 2 reasons why this card's much better. If I sit against you and you play a Magenta the Lion deck, it's not Magenta, but I'm just going to call it that from now on. We are meeting in the parking lot. I hate to say it. Like, when you sit down, you're essentially... You want to fight. That's why you played this card. But I respect you for it. Now, I respect you enough to run the ones, but I respect you enough to, wait till you spend 3 hours into a Commander game. Honestly, let me say, it's going up by Elish Norn. It's a much worse card than any of the cards in A tier, but I just gain enough respect for the Magenta player by making a human in my head that wants to play Magenta that now I feel it deserves to go in A tier, I feel you. The worst years of my life, Vault 75, middle school. On 1, it gets to exile all creatures with power 4 or greater, and then the next 2 abilities don't matter. This is mid. It's a 4-drop. It's a 4-drop that does what Elspeth's Minus does, so it probably ends up in B tier. Probably ends up right at you can't see it, but it's ending right there in B tier. Realistically. It's right below Sunfall for all you keeping track at home. Now, this is a card I would have immediately looked over. Pop all creatures. For each creature destroyed this way, its controller makes a 1/1 white spirit. This is a card I would say, whatever, C tier, it has a niche, but whatever, move on. But I've been playing this card in tokens, and man, is it broken. It's a Wrath that also somehow makes you a pretty big board. If you have a doubling season, this is a Wrath that doubles your board state. I play it in my Balin deck, so I'm usually making a huge board state and then tapping out to play Balin again and then making a shit ton more mana, which I think is going to get it to the bottom of B tier. It's getting to the bottom of B tier because I am biased. This card is very good in a deck that I own. Therefore, it's not necessarily better than something like Realm Cloak Giant, than Planar Disaster, where, they're also, I'm sure, incredible in a deck somebody owns. The difference is that I own this deck. And at this point, I just want to put it there. Our next in our long line of cards that have this text on it, 5 mana, pop all tapped creatures. But until my next turn, whenever a creature becomes tapped, destroy it. Cute. I mean, it's kind of a fog, right? It's a Wrath that also fogs for 1 turn, but it fogs for everybody. I play it in a deck that is based around politicking and forcing attacks, and in that deck, this card's crazy. That's a super niche deck. Super niche decks go into C tier. It goes right there. Also, pretty art. I'm sure none of you have read this card, so I will read it to you. 7 mana, remove all permanents from the game, including lands. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player turns 1 of the removed cards to play. So, you have to make a tough choice. 1, you can get Dimensional Breached and go, bring back my Soul Ring, bring back my Mountain, bring back my Triome, bring back my lands every turn to get some ramp going so we can continue playing this game. Or, you exile my Galta. Maybe I get a 12/12 out while nobody has a board state. Oh, well, since he got a Galta out, I guess I have to get my big creatures out so that I don't die to a fucking Galta. Once one player gets a creature out, it becomes real hard for everyone else to get their lands back. So this is a really fun way, and I mean this genuinely. I know it's going to sound like I'm messing with you, but this is a very fun way to play mass land destruction. Because it gives players choices and makes almost its own little minigame. And I think that little minigame is enough to put it here. It's probably the most underrated Wrath on this deck, or on this whole tier list. I've never seen anyone play this card before, but it just looks so fun and so interesting that I want to play it. Depopulate. Welcome to a little line of cards we call Day of Judgment, but slightly better. This is Day of Judgment, but each player who controls a multicolored creature draws a card. So, it's slightly better than Investigating. And Devastating Mastery. Destroy all non-land permanents for 6 mana. So, it's already starting out at the Planar Cleansing level. It's right here already. You can pay 4 mana instead. If you do, an opponent chooses 2 non-land permanents they control and returns it to their hand before we remove everything. This could be interesting if you've made like a deal, if you can barter with somebody, have like a really cool team up with them. But most of the time, it just kind of sucks every way you spin it. It's definitely above the Moijin, but like it's pretty mid. It's going into D tier at the bottom because this doesn't have a niche. Like the soul, the weird hourglass thing has a niche deck that it could be played in. Devastating Mastery doesn't. It's just incredibly mid. Shatter the Sky. Welcome to the group of cards we call Day of Judgment, but a little bit better. Whoa! Now you draw if you have a 4-drop. Oh, Pog thumbnail. Card's bad. Moving on. This is just a hater. Major Tarot, known hater. 2/3 for 4 with flying. Bad stat line. Is a legend. You could play this card as your commander, by the way. Pay 5 mana, crack it, pop all black creatures. There's a card called Darkness that makes all creatures black. This is exile removal. Super niche. It's much worse than the Indigo, Violet, whatever that card is, Magenta, which puts this card real low in the D tier. Probably way lower than that. Yeah, about here in the D tier. It's just quite bad. Cataclysm. Each player chooses a artifact, a creature, and enchantment in the land they control. Sacrifice the rest. Honestly, you're going to look at me and you're going to say, oh, this shouldn't be below Cataclysmic Gearhulk and all this card because it gets to destroy lands and land removal is broken. No, it's not. It's generally much worse than you think it is. You're usually going to lose to somebody who spent their 5 mana that turn doing something real. Balance, but worse. It's balance, so each player chooses a number of lands they control equal to the number controlled by the fewest. And then you do the same for creatures and cards in hand, and then you sack the rest. It doesn't have a mana value, so you're not allowed to cast it. You have to either cast it without paying its mana cost through some means, or suspend it for 6 turns. But realistically, you're going to be skipping those 6 turns by doing something dumb. The problem is, when you're doing something dumb and choosing a different way to play it, there are so many better cards like this, like an Ancestral Recall or a Demonic Tutor, that balance kind of feels like a waste of that ability, right? So it goes about here into F tier, because there are some decks that are going to play Restore Balance, but I honestly think it's kind of wasted. During your upkeep, if there are 4 more creatures in play, destroy all creatures. And sacrifice Planar Collapse. It is sacrifice, so we can't give it like indestructible to keep it around forever. Honestly, it's going right here. You want to know why? Because this card does basically the same thing. You have to wait till your upkeep. The only difference is Planar Collapse costs 2 mana instead of 5. So it feels a little bit better. But you have to survive any number of 1, enchantment removal, which is just going to kill you. Or 2, the player with a huge board state going, oh, you have a Wrath up? Fucking attack you with all my creatures. You have to survive that. So, rough. Destroy all lands or all creatures. I don't think this card gets any bonus points for being land destruction, because I think mass land destruction is worse than you think it is. It's going right here. Most of the time, it's going to be 6 mana, destroy all creatures, and you're going to feel bad about running this card in your deck. Not only that, it's going to be 6 mana, destroy all creatures, and then your opponents are going to go, wow, you're running land destruction in your power level 7 deck? Cool, man. You're really fun to hang out with. Hey, actually, next time, we're not meeting at Bryson's. We're meeting at Arby's. So just go there next time. Yeah, don't worry about it. Speaking of cards you've never seen before, bury all permanents with the same name except for basic lands. Whenever a permanent other than a basic land comes into play, bury any permanent with the same name. When I talk about true and utter hatred, this is the card. You are playing this deck because there's a Shadowborn Apostle player at your LGS and you hate them. Not their deck. You hate them as a person. And so you want to play Eye of Singularity to go, no, no. You're playing one of every card. Fuck you. Don't care. It's in the bottom of D tier. Realistically, it's an F tier. But whatevs. Bury all creatures with power 4 or greater. Hey, do you remember that card from earlier that destroyed all creatures with power 4 or greater? Where'd it go? I put it somewhere special. I was saving it. It's somewhere. I can smell it. I can smell it. Destroy all creatures with power 4 or greater. Where is it? Where? Hey, this card destroys all creatures with toughness 4 or greater. This is that, but better. Choose a number between 0 and 13. Each player sacrifices that many creatures. Love this card. It is non-destruction removal. They have to sacrifice, which gets around a lot of things, like indestructible. And also, if you have 6 creatures out and you have the most creatures, you can pick 6. If an opponent has 10 creatures out and they have the most, and you're like, well, there's no way I can get around that, you can just pick 13. Yes, this isn't going to wrath the board if a player has 150 tokens out, but I mean, at that point, sometimes you just got to take the L. I play this card in any token deck I have because it is a wrath that, you know, is pretty nice against tokens. Let's put this into there. Ravnica at War. Exile all multicolored permanents. So I used to be a big Ravnica at War fan. I was thinking that this card was like, oh, wow. You play this in every single mono white deck ever that's ever existed ever. Because so many commanders are multicolored. So Ravnica at War in a mono white deck often says each opponent exiles their own commander. Get fucked, idiots. What this card really says is every time you play this card, you sit at a table full of monocolored players and you just have a brick in your deck. So I think it's decent. I think it's probably still in B tier because I think you should still probably play it in most mono white lists. But look at how many better Wrath there are. It feels kind of rough to put a Ravnica in War in your deck, right? Single combat. Each player chooses a creature or planeswalker they control. Sacrifice the rest. Whoa, we've seen this card 15 times. But players can't cast creature or planeswalker spells until the end of our next turn. You might say that and go, ooh, that can be pretty strong. You play a big boy, and then you make everyone sack all their creatures except for one. You swing in with your big boy, and then you go, well, nobody's casting creatures or planeswalkers until my next turn, so I get the first go at it. But the thing is, you don't. Because it's gonna... Single combat happens. Then for the rest of the turn, you can't do anything. Then each opponent has a turn where they can't do anything. Then it gets back around to you. Then you can't do anything for an additional turn. So it locks everyone out for one turn. But for you, it actually locks you out for 2 turns. And that is why I think this card is the D tier card. Because it actually stops you for 2 turns. When it stops everyone else for just 1. I think there are definitely decks, again, I'm going to say the word Narset, and you're going to groan, but like, this is a card that's going to go into certain decks because they play 1 creature, and they don't care about anything else. And they're playing single combat because, who cares? I'm playing 1 creature. But, in that same token, do you want to single combat your Bruna because it's the only creature in your deck? What happens when you get Doombladed the very next turn? Now, it gets back to your turn, and you don't get to do shit, because you can't play out Bruna, because you're locked under single combat. It makes you weaker to single target removal. Like, single combat just kind of sucks. Also, your opponent gets to choose, you don't even get to choose, so they get to keep around their best card. Solidly D tier. Crisis of Conscience, pop all tokens, or pop all non-land permanents that aren't tokens. Sure, is my opinion. 6 mana is a lot. 6 mana C tier. But if you're a token deck, maybe you think about playing this card just to you know, keep around all your tokens while also wrathing the board anyway. Everything comes to dust. I'll be honest, these Doctor Who cards have not been doing a great job, so I'm kind of worried. Convoke, exile all creatures except those that share a creature type with... Sorry. Exile all... This is... I think this is just, like, really weirdly made, so I'm going to say it a little bit easier. Exile all artifacts. Exile all enchantments. Exile all creatures except those that share a creature type with a creature that convoked this card. So, first off, you're exiling all artifacts and all enchantments, which is good usually. You don't get to choose like Farewell, so it's not, S tier, but really good usually. Then, by convoking this with something like, a human in your humans deck, slivers in your slivers deck, you can keep around part of the board. Also, if you just want to tap out all your little weird plant tokens and random guys, there's a chance you can get this card down to like 3 mana and then just keep around tokens. This card's B tier. Only problem I can see of it is sometimes you're going to look at it and be like, ooh, I can cast this card for 3 mana. Doing so is going to cause me to tap a human, an orc, a goblin, and a merfolk, and a warrior, right? And then you're going to look at the board and you're going to go, oh, this is actually removing nothing. Like, I'm doing all of this mana and creatures tapping to destroy, like, 2 cards that don't share a creature type with everything else. That sucks. But except for those situations, I think this card's pretty decent. Another Doctor Who card. 6 mana, pop all creatures, but it reanimates something. Cool. We have 5 mana to destroy all creatures, but it happens immediately and doesn't die to enchantment removal. So, C tier. Sorry, card's just not very strong. You know what, actually? I'm lying. Because this card is slightly better than this card, I think. I believe so. No, I don't. I'm lying. This card's down here. I think it's good, but I don't think it's that good. Also, this card's probably above it. Also, I think this card's probably about here. Expel the Interlopers. Hey, it's the card from earlier. Choose a power, and then destroy all the other ones. There's like 4 of this card. Where's the other one? Show me the other one, where we choose a creature and pop all creature with a greater power. Where is it? There's choose a creature, pop all creatures with a greater power. Where are you? Fell the Mighty? Cool. It's slightly better than Fell the Mighty. I'll be real with y'all. But not very better. Settle the Wreckage. This is going to make Nolan mad. So, Nolan, if you're out there watching this, if you got all the way 2 hours in and you're still watching, close your eyes, turn it off for a few seconds, come back at in the exit of the video. But this card's not good. Now, it's not as bad as the one that makes your opponent hit you, but it does only exile all attacking creatures. So you only get to remove 1 player's board, and even then they get a path for every card exiled. There's a 6-drop that doesn't even require attacking, and it does it from every player. I cannot imagine a deck that I put Settle the Wreckage in, and since it has literally no niche case where I want to play Settle the Wreckage, it's landing at the very bottom of D tier. It's not F, but it's the very bottom. Destroy all non-land permanents. It costs 3 less to cast if there are 10 or more non-land permanents in the battlefield. This is solidly B tier. 3 mana, pop all non-land permanents is real strong. I can absolutely imagine a deck that I'm playing Hour of Revelation in. I can imagine like 10 decks that I would throw an Hour of Revelation in. A deck that maybe has Indestructible, ways to give Indestructible, a deck that doesn't actually run that many cards, like an instant and sorcery based deck. Something like that where you are perfectly fine paying 3 mana to play this, recasting your commander, playing like a mana rock from your hand, and having a good time with it. Is it as good as Chroma's Vengeance? Probably not, but I think it's right there, where it has its niches, but overall it doesn't really need a niche. It's just a very strong card. And that's it. We're down to our very last card, and it's a fun one. 8 mana, destroy all non-land permanents, but it is also a flip land. So you can just play it as a land at any time. And I should say, pretty obviously, this card is an S tier. Onto Inversion is another one of those cards that I don't have to think about. Farewell, I can just throw it in a deck. Onto Inversion, just throw it in a deck. Because no matter what happens, at the very end, I can just go, well, it's a land, right? It's a tap land. I don't really mind. I'll just throw an Onto Inversion in there. And I think that ability to be, multiple things really helps. So, this is it. This is the final tier list. I highly suggest you guys go on and make your own and figure out what you guys got. But I pretty much like where I'm at. I'm trying to figure out if there's anything I really want to switch around, any cards that are a little bit too low. But maybe this could go under there. I think anything I would change at this point would be incredibly minor differences. I am missing one card. I'll be real with y'all. There's a card in here that should be in here called Vanquish the Horde. It's an 8-drop, pop all creatures, but it costs 1 less for each creature you control. So I just want you to imagine that card in S tier, because it would be an S tier. It's a Blasphemous Act, but for white. Usually it just costs 2 mana, and it's pretty decent. So, other than that, I think this is complete. Thank you all for listening through this. If you fell asleep during this video, good. That's what it's meant for. I will be making another version with all the other colors at some point in my life. So, thank you all for joining me. Goodbye.